Hello and welcome to episode 131 of Prose. This week, get saucy with some dead men, and find out where all those wishes you placed on stars ended up. While you listen or scroll, please head over to prosepodcast.com for your one-stop shop for all things prose. From there, you can follow the program on all social media under @prosepodcast across, again, all those platforms, and you can also find the small but growing online store. If you are enjoying the show, please click that 5-star button and leave a rating or review for Prose wherever you're listening. It really does help a lot. I know I say that all the time and you hear it on all podcasts, but it's the truth. For easiest access to the show, subscribe using whatever podcast app is your favorite. Maybe the one you're listening through right now? Do go check out the Prose Patreon page at patreon.com/Prose Podcast and consider supporting the show there. You'll get some swag out of that deal, along with my eternal thanks. And all of that, one more time, is on prosepodcast.com. Now, let's get to the tale, shall we? This week we have Dead Dick Eye and Collecting. Enjoy. Dead Dick Eye, an original short story by Jared I. McGee. Richard couldn't say he had the best job in the kingdom, but he had it better than most. Looking at the men swinging from the ropes, the contents of their bladders and bowels dripping out through the opening in their pant legs, Richard thought he had a good go of life indeed. With hangings, the women and men that believed in the old ways weren't in the way of completing his tasks. Anytime someone had a blade to their neck, or ropes set to tear them apart, or anything resulting in some nice blood spray, the poor and desperate would come out for a sprinkling. The church denounced that there was power in the blood of a dying criminal, of course, but the unwashed masses like himself didn't see too terribly big of a leap from the blood of Christ and the blood of innocence and all their magic blood the priests went on and on about, and this blood coming from these men at the end of their lives. Swingers, though, didn't come with the healing lucky spray. But the hung did come with what Richard needed: their cocks. The fancy physicers he overheard that brought their anatomy students out to study the human body in the throes of death often said that this phenomenon of a man getting hard as a rock below the waist was a result of blood pooling below the neck and the noose squishing all that blood down there. Those same physicers, as well as a pretty good barber that did surgeon work on the side, had said that women actually have a similar swelling in their nether regions, but that people A, didn't talk about it, as it was untoward, and B, on the rare occasion a woman was hung, you couldn't see the same sort of bulge as you do from a man's pants for obvious reasons, though they were prone to a little extra leaking of blood. Richard thought on that for a second as he waited for the crowd to disperse. He wondered why those desperate for an executed man or woman's blood didn't come for the little extra leakage amid a female hanging. Oh well, no mind. Like clockwork, the people lost their bloodlust and dissipated just in time for the men's penises to become fully erect as they hung there marinating in their various fluids. Priapism. That was the word he couldn't remember. The physicers used that word a lot with this end-of-life desire coming on the dead. But the term didn't really matter to Richard. He was here to make some money. He needed the seed and the units of these dead men. He used to feel bad about gelding the dead, but the gold that came from the rich and the true believers in magic quickly made that initial disdain for his own actions disappear. The seed and tackle were worth a lot, of money. The magic that came from what was known in the alleyways of the city as angel lust was just as powerful, if not more so, than the blood of the dead. The idea that the denizens of heaven came down to help the damned with one last bit of carnal earthly pleasure set the mind and spirit ablaze. Some bought the gruesome ornaments just to show how powerful they were. They put them on their lounge room tables near their fainting couches as a means of provoking curiosity of guests. It also didn't hurt that they were simultaneously a good way to boast of wealth and access to a certain element of society willing to do some rather grisly work. In that last way, the dead men's erections were a veiled threat, too. Don't cross me. I know scoundrels. Richard would occasionally go for the hands of these men, too. Hands of glory were considered equally powerful, though in a different way. But they were also a bit bulkier and clunkier to carry and preserve than most men's genitals. Hands were also a bit meatier, so they would get a bit more stink to them quicker than a cock and or balls. These current three would hang here for at least a full day as a deterrent to other murderers and thieves. Then they would be cut down and put into a pauper's grave. Richard had bribed the local watch commander with a couple coppers to make sure he wouldn't be bothered as he harvested his twigs. First, he got below the gallows and gathered any of the thick, viscous offshoot from the men. This ghostly ejaculate would serve as seeds for mandrakes, which themselves were powerful magic plants. Plus, his patroness for this round of gelding was very clear that she needed all the seed from these three. Once he'd collected the mandrake seeds, he took down the trousers of all three men, and it was a simple 3 slices before he had a bag full of gold that did not yet clink. He did take a little bit of extra care to cover up the tips of the penises with leather caps, though, as he was assuming the reasons his buyer was so exacting with her instruction was that she would be planning to use the expelled semen for the base of a fertility tincture moving forward. If it weren't for a fertility tincture, Richard didn't want to think on what it might actually be used for. He didn't believe in magic, but he didn't disbelieve it either. He'd seen his clients be able to do some strange things over the years, and he knew the angel lust could end lives, enslave souls, stamp out the will, and more. Worse, honestly. Richard heard the cry from the local constabulary.
All's well, keep the king's peace.
That was the signal for him to get moving. His coppers had been spent, and if he were caught now, he'd be charged himself. He could very well end up swinging from a rope himself. And then some other less deft harvester would come and geld him. As always, despite it being beaten out of him over the years, Richard stopped and looked back. He hustled over to the 3 now hanging and bleeding men, their trousers still down, and he intoned, "In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread till thou return into the ground, for out of it wast thou taken, for dust thou art, and dust thou shalt remain." He made the holy sign of the cross and hurried away. He couldn't just leave them there without a blessing. A dark one, but one that he heard from his priest most weeks, and one that seemed pretty damn appropriate for their situation. Richard turned the corner as the city watch came striding by. He ducked his head and was thankful he'd invested in the oiled otter hide bag that he now carried the cocks in, since it wouldn't allow the blood to leak through. Off to deliver the goods to this woman and receive his reward. Gold for lust, for desperation, for desire, for fear.
In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return into the ground, For out of it wast thou taken. For dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return.
Richard needed his bread, and he'd have to provide this service until unto dust he did return. He further retreated under his hood as more constables passed by, and he shivered. Until dust shalt thou return. He hurried down the street into the darkness. Thank you for listening to Dead Dick Eye, an original short story by me, Jared I. McGee. Next up, stick around and find out where all those hopes, wishes, prayers, dreams you've been tossing out into the cosmos and on stars have wandered off to. Collecting, an original short story by Jared I. McGee. Every night, the old woman goes out. She rests until the sun begins to shrink away from the world. At twilight, she would begin to get dressed. Once readied for the evening with layers and scarves, she was always cold, you know. She would last put her jar into her shoulder bag that she had knitted for herself an age ago. She'd knitted the bag in grays and browns and blacks and the deepest greens of the deepest forests and the darkest purples of the cosmos. She had knitted the bag specifically to comfortably fit the somewhat sizable jar. Her house was off the beaten path. It sat between two streams that formed something of a crossroads there in the trees. The old woman had to exit her front door and then go up the slight incline to the large meadow in the middle of the woods where she did her collecting night after night, rain or snow. Clear nights were the best for collecting, though, and tonight was a clear night. The path to the meadow always shuffled and rustled with little animals zipping through the undergrowth. This was true of the days and the evenings both. Sometimes the rustling would turn louder, and the little woman would know that a bear or fisher cat or coyote or white-tailed deer had found its way near her home. They all knew it was safe near the cottage by the streams. She did not try to scare them or hurt them. They knew she was gentle and would care for them if they were injured or hungry. The animals did not avoid the cottage. People generally did, though. Something about her living alone out in the woods put people off. She had also been told that things out in the cottage near the meadow felt wrong, sideways, slippery. The path to the meadow took her about 20 to 30 minutes to traverse on a good day. On a bad day, when the snow fell by the foot or the rain poured down in a deluge, the old woman would have to walk slowly and the trip would take a full hour. Obscured skies are bad for collecting. Stumbling ways are bad for collecting, too. Once she had filled her jar, it just wouldn't do to drop it on the stretch back to her home. Tonight, though, was a good night for collecting. It was clear. She could see the stars all the more brightly. Their light wavered and danced in her eyes. And she waited. You see, the whole world, all cultures and ages, all geographies and religions, well, they all wished upon stars. They cast their greatest hopes and wishes and prayers and dreams out into the blackness to rest upon the celestial fires. What they did not know is that once those stars were lassoed by human hopes, they could be taken from the firmament. They became something different, something more tangible and a touch less heavenly. The taint of the terrestrial weighed down the stellar, made them lesser and more both. It made them items that the discerning eye or mind could collect. The little old woman continued to watch the pinholed blackness with eagerness, something akin to hunger. In fact, she did find that she salivated just a bit more when she was out and actively collecting. Lost in her thoughts and reflections, a little fawn clambered up and out of the tree line into the meadow. It came to stand right beside her. It had yet to learn the fear of humans that most wild fauna of the forests had. The old woman took comfort in its presence. Used to, her dog Sparkles would come out with her along the path and stand near her in the meadow during her collecting. The white Shih Tzu would get so dirty on the walk there and back. Sometimes, Sparkles would get twigs and burrs and leaves embedded in her fur, the little beast loving to romp through the meadow, often chasing fireflies in the warmer months, more regularly chasing chipmunks during the cooler months. Sparkles wouldn't harm those fuzzy little ones. She would just prance and dance and chase them about. The chipmunks, for their part, seemed to play along a bit, though the old woman thought it wasn't all fun and games from them. They did seem to chatter angrily at Sparkles whenever they would reach a spot of safety and the game came to a halt. This little fawn would learn fear soon enough. It would learn loss and death. For now, it could stand by the old woman and they could share this evening together, like she and Sparkles once had. The old woman felt it now. There was something intangible but tangible still. A tug in the air. A type of tension and resonance that alerted her that it was time. She slowly, carefully pulled her large jar out of her knitted knapsack with both hands, taking great care to do it quietly and calmly, both to avoid dropping it in the home stretch and to avoid spooking her little sylvan companion away, here, during the most special part of the evening. The little old woman let the jar rest somewhat in the crook of her left arm and unscrewed the jar's lid, putting the rather sizable thing in her right coat pocket for easy use. She would be needing to seal the jar quickly later. The tension in the air became a pulsing, a thrumming that meant it was time. It was time to collect the stars, to gather and catch the wishes of others in her jar to take home and fuel her. The jar was nothing special, just something she'd saved from something long gone, used up. She was the special one. That made her feel worthwhile. The old woman held her jar aloft, and the stars came rushing toward her. From outside the meadow, it had to look like a meteor shower or a rather epic conflagration of shooting stars. From inside the meadow, it must seem that a swarm of fireflies were coming into the jar all together and of their own free will. In reality, the old woman was reaching out into the blackness, to the celestial fires, and taking the people of the world's greatest hopes and wishes and prayers and dreams. Catching wishes was something she did nightly. They seemed to enliven her, to invigorate her. She had thought they might save Sparkles, and some dim thought of the before times that maybe they could have saved her husband. But the stars didn't seem to work that way. Still, they seemed to make her something more. Else.
Other.
A long time ago, a very long time ago now, she had wondered what taking people's greatest hopes and wishes and prayers and dreams might mean for those individuals that were calling out in hope or fear or desperation or veneration wherever they were out in the world. The old woman had shrugged off those questions, though. Why should she care, after all? She was out here in the woods. She was out here alone in the woods, and the people of the world gave no mind to her hopes and wishes and prayers and dreams. No one saw to her needs. These people were calling out into the void and would not be receiving an answer. Of that much she was certain. So the wishes were hers to collect, to keep. She consumed them, in a way, if a bit passively, as they sat on the shelf of her living room. They hummed. They glowed with an amber ambience. They kept her company. Most hopes lasted a week or two. Wishes were more fleeting, and prayers, though the most potent, were the quickest to decay and disappear. Dreams, however. Dreams had longevity. Dreams sometimes could last years. She'd had some for half a decade that were going strong, there at the bottom of the jar. Not all dreams lasted, of course, but the ones that did were like embers in the hearth. They glowed and glowed, not with incandescence, no, not with a rage, but with subtlety. The dreams of others were a delicacy and a comfort. The old woman didn't understand any of the how or why behind her ability. In truth, she didn't remember how and when she had first discovered it. Maybe it was shortly after Marty's death. She knew he hadn't been around when she'd begun collecting. The old woman jumped a bit. The jar was filling fast, and it was time to put the lid back on. She curled down a bit to rest the jar on her leg and put the lid back on as quickly as she could fish it out of her pocket and rest it on top of the jar. This could last her a couple days, but she grew tense and disaffected when she didn't come out to commune with the stars and collect those that had been weighted down by humanity. Her collection and her collecting is what kept her going these days. She needed to harvest nightly. It brought her comfort. It also helped her fill her days, transferring those few hopes, dreams, wishes, prayers that lasted beyond a night into other smaller jars that she kept across her mantle. With a heaving sigh that chilled her lungs, the old woman lovingly put her now full and glowing jar into her bag, gave the still motionless fawn the slightest pat on its side, and began to make her way down from the meadow and back to her home between the streams, in the deeps and the darks and the loneliness of the forest. Thank you for listening to Collecting, an original short story by me, Jared I. McGee. All sounds that you have heard through both stories come from YouTube's free audio library and freesound.org. All the sounds are being used under CC 01.0 public domain dedication licenses. That does it this week for Prose. As always, I hope you enjoyed the 2 tales. I hope you'll join me in 2 weeks' time for some more journeys through the boundless seas of fiction. Until then, as you go about your week, I hope that you will love those around you, tell them that you do, and embrace this life as it is stranger than fiction. Thank you so much for listening.